Let's walk through how to set up a recurring invoice. Inside your client's project, open the Invoices tab and then click Recurring Invoices. Any recurring invoices on this project will be visible here. To start a new one, click Add. First, choose the frequency of the invoice using the recurrence settings. You can set an interval of weeks, months, or years as the billing cycle. Next, choose when you'd like the first invoice to be sent. If we choose today's date and a frequency of every 1 month, any recurring invoices will be created and sent to the client on this date each month. If you'd prefer the exact date to be consistent, we recommend choosing a date that all months will have, like the 1st or the 15th, rather than the 30th or 31st. You can leave the end date blank if you're providing an ongoing service with no set time frame. In that case, you can manually stop the recurring invoice if your work ends. Setting an end date makes sense if there's a set time frame for your billing. Be sure to choose a date 1 or 2 days after the final invoice to ensure it goes out no problem. The next section is for invoice line items. It's important to remember that this amount represents how much will be invoiced on each billing date. So if you want to bill the client $100 a month for 12 months, you would enter a line item for $100. You would not enter a line item for the full $1,200 since that would charge your client $14,400 over the year. Finally, there's the payment schedule area where you will define when this invoice is actually due. Be sure to use a relative due date and the trigger after payment schedule is applied to invoice on all recurring invoices. If the invoice is due on receipt, you can set the relative due date for 0 days, or you can allow extra time for payment as needed. Then set the amount to 100% due and add reminders if you'd like. Once you double check that you have set the correct amount, start date, and frequency, click Start Recurrence. If you have set the start date to the current date, the first invoice will be created and sent immediately. If you set the start date to another day in the future, the first invoice will not be created or sent until that date. Dubsado will use the default Send Invoice template to send out recurring invoices automatically. This is one instance where you will not have an opportunity to customize the default email on a per-client basis or before it sends, but you can customize this template under Templates, Canned Emails, Edit Templates as needed. Just be sure to keep the invoice link smart field so that the client can access their invoice. We also have a default canned email that sends when a client who is enrolled in autopay has a failed payment. Feel free to update the wording in this default email as well, since it will send to the client automatically so they can pay the invoice manually and update their payment information. Tip number 1. If you plan to use recurring invoices often, we recommend creating a package template for the correct amount and a payment schedule template for 100% of the invoice. Tip number 2. The payment schedule tells Dubsado when an invoice is due. Even though it's unlikely that you'll need to split a recurring invoice into multiple installments, you still want to add a payment schedule so Dubsado knows when to mark an invoice as overdue and send an email following up. Tip number 3. Of the available triggers in a payment schedule, only after payment schedule is applied to invoice will function properly on a recurring invoice. Currently, you are not able to set a due date for a specific day of the month. You can achieve something similar by setting your recurring invoice to start on the 1st of the month and then setting your due date to 15 days after payment schedule is applied to invoice, so the invoice is actually due on the 15th.